welcome back to the Reading Corner. Today we're covering a favourite duelist and Omega level X-Men, Storm. I'll talk more about her gameplay at the end. For now, let's jump straight into our lore segment. Dreamy do. Very few mutants had the honour of serving on both the Quiet Council of Krakoa and the Great Ring of Arakko simultaneously. Aurora Monroe was one, and she had longed forward to the day when the two sentient islands might be reunited. She had not, however, counted on it happening quite like this. It had begun without her even knowing, while she was walking along the coral shores that, together with the Great Oceanic Lagoon, separated Arakko from the Great Red Desert of Mars. The tiny whirls and eddies in time grew almost instantly into a great wave of disruption. Ordinarily, Storm was hypersensitive to tiny changes in the atmosphere around her, due to the nature of her mutant powers, but she had been preoccupied with the next challenge to her seat on the Great Ring, and let that preoccupation distract her from her immediate and sensory environment. Now aware that something was happening before she understood what, her pulse quickened, then slowed again to a thud. Raindrops slowed, hung still in the air, then hurtled again towards the ground, each one a different speed. Clouds tore through the sky, cleared, then rebuilt themselves into great black walls, all in seconds. Behind them, the sky inverted its normal uniform brilliant blue. Streaks of indigo and black split from the horizon to horizon, revealing stars that were not the stars Storm knew. She raised her hand and saw raindrops falling on her skin, and others passing straight through her hand as if they weren't there. All around her plants grew, bloomed, then died, all in an instant. Trees split the skies, growing 200 feet high and toppling, becoming soil again before their falling trunks even hit the ground. The air was thick with flowers and insects, moving through a million generations before her eyes as she grew breath. Arakko and Krakoa both appeared before her, partly as if they were superimposed on each other. Then Aurora realized she was seeing it wrong. The two islands were colliding, moulding into one another as the overlapping timelines tore away all boundaries of sense. The Red Keep and the Tower of Broken World overlapped, merged, hybridized, and became something new that Storm couldn't quite focus on before it was all swept away in the next spasm of the time disruption. Krakoa's bays and Arakko's coral swirled into new configurations. Krakoa's quarry and the Circle Perilous of Arakko blended into each other before finally breaking free. But now the quarry contained Arakkan combatants and the Circle Perilous bewildered mutants of Krakoa. The forests of both islands overgrew each other and separated again, each featuring new species and unknown hybrids. The harder the wind blew, the faster the transformations, and now Storm saw tiny slivers of some new material appearing in the tempest, sleeting down to the island's surface and shores. The particles stung when they hit her skin, a pain that wasn't entirely physical. It was as if they were injuring her abilities to locate in space and time. She reeled momentarily, then got her bearings again. The particles rained down over the islands, driving both into a frenzy. Arakko and Krakoa briefly fought each other, bitter as only siblings can be, Storm standing on their soil with one foot in each world. She knew she would be subsumed and destroyed if she did not do something, and as deformed time tore through her being again, rippling her mind away wind would ripple her hair, she realized what she could do. This was a storm across all of time, and if it was a storm, she could control it. Storm's power over weather was instinctive and had been since she was a girl. This was new and would not be guided by instinct, but by her conscious mind, which was under constant distraction by the onslaught of particles. They ruined her concentration and kept her from grounding herself in the here and now, which was necessary if she was to bring her powers to bear on this tumult. And she was not the only one suffering from the particles. The islands, brutally crushed into each other's reality, wailed in pain and fear, both a sound like a hurricane wind and a psychic scream that rang in Storm's mind. This spurred her into action. She may have been the regent of Arakko, but she still had responsibilities to Krakoa as well. The time storm was forcing them together, and also twisting a new reality into being around them. Storm felt those currents of power, realized they moved in a system, and for a moment understood that system. Her mutant powers responded, the way electrical charges crackled about her body when she controlled lightning. Now space-time itself rippled around her body, creating glimpses of a million different Aurora Monroes from a million different realities. but none of them could disturb or displace her. She found herself in control, and she began to quiet the storm. Its boundaries, she knew, extended far beyond her ability to control it, but she had influence over this one small part, and that she intended to use. Krakoa and Arako were at stake, and with them the lives of thousands of mutants who would otherwise be adrift on the time stream. She could not let the time storm merge two islands together. The islands both feared for their survival, and they began to tear each other physically with greater intensity as their fear created a feedback loop. Only Storm could stop this madness. She began to guide the currents of Storm, shunting away the most damaging gusts and finding smoother paths for Krakoa and Arako to move through time. Was she guiding them through time, the way a skilled ship's captain brought a vessel through a storm to safe harbours? If so, where would they arrive? Gradually, slowly, she channeled the powers of the time storm around the two living islands, letting them redivide into their own entities, drifting further and further apart. Heavier fronts of the stinging particles blew through, and now they were larger, merging into crystals. They precipitated from the storm. They precipitated from the storm the way rain precipitated from clouds too heavy with moisture. Who had caused this time storm? How were different realities becoming entangled and overlaid on one another? These were questions for another time. Now she had to make sure the storm was passing, and not just gathering itself for another onslaught. She felt its energy dwindle, even as the crystals fell in greater numbers all around her. All across the island's surface, as she had thought, she looked around and realised that the coronal outburst had subsided. Krakoa and Arako had nearly become one in a collapse that could have destroyed them both, and doubtless would have annihilated many of the lives on each. The aftershocks and echoes of their psychic battle still churned in the air around her, but like the time storm, that battle was almost over. Storm stood on the coastline of Krakoa, gazing out at the ocean, and... Wait, when the time storm had begun, Storm had been on Mars, on Arako. Now, as reality settled back into place, she saw that she was on Krakoa, at the edge of Hellfire Bay, where the White Palace and Blackstone stared at each other from opposing parameters. The air smelled new, sharp with life and the scent of just past storm, but it was definitely earth air. Looked around her, over beautiful living Krakoa, and despite her jarring dislocation, she felt an almost maternal pride at the way she had brought it through the crisis. But how had it happened? And now that it was over, how had Storm been transported millions of miles without her ever passing through a Krakoan gateway? Had Arako been safely returned to its home on Mars? Was this even the same timeline that the living islands had occupied before the time storm? It had been more powerful than anything she had ever felt, maybe even more powerful than her brief contact with the Phoenix Force. Who had caused it? And how? More importantly, why? What damage had been done to the mutants living on both islands? How could she ensure this did not happen again? These were her leader's questions. More personally, Storm was anxious to know that her friends and loved ones were alright. She would have to seek them out, both on Krakoa and Arako, to make sure they had weathered this time storm. And what of the broader world? What was the situation in New York or Wakanda? Would she even find the same New York or the same Wakanda that she had once known? All around her, the crystals precipitated from the storm lay thick on the ground. Storm bent and gathered several of them in her hand, like a mineral made of time, she thought. Xavier needed to hear about this immediately. Magneto as well, although Storm decided on the spot that Xavier should know first. Both old adversaries believed themselves to have Mutant's best interest in mind, but Storm's vision aligned much more closely with Xavier's. Where was he? Here on Krakoa, or elsewhere in this world? Was it a new world, a new time, or had she misunderstood the nature of the storm? Storm saw people emerging from the forest of Krakoa. Some of them she recognized, some were new to her. They saw her high on the ridge overlooking the ocean, and they looked to her for guidance. No matter where they hailed from, Krakoa or Arako, Earth or Mars, the past or present or future, she knew one thing: she would not let them down. So yeah, previous lore segments said that Storm was the one who basically weathered the time storm and allowed Krakoa to arrive in 2099 safely. So this is obviously the event of her doing that. I'd be honest, I think this is the first lore segment that's put into detail the actual Timestream Entanglement as we saw it. So, yeah, that was a nice little thing to but her playstyle as a duelist, she is clearly more of a support character. Her abilities rely a lot on buffing herself and buffing her allies. So she's both played most well if you put her in the environment alongside her allies, whilst firing lightning and wind at enemies and summoning tornadoes. I quite enjoyed playing her actually, and yeah, trying to keep everybody together was a challenge if you want them to benefit from your assistance. Anyway, like and subscribe. Be sure to like and subscribe to enjoy the video, and I'll see you in the next one.